ASP.NET MVC includes two project templates for use with Visual Studio 2008 and 2010. The first is ASP.NET MVC2 Empty Web Application and ASP.NET MVC2 Web Application. Both templates are available for both Visual Basic and C#. Other than the language, the templates are identical. You can access the templates from the New Project dialog box that opens when you select File, New Project from the Visual Studio menu. The Web Application template creates a basic but fully functional MVC application, complete with a model, a couple of controllers, and a few views. It uses best practice HTML with CSS or cascading style sheets to format the views. It also includes support for authentication and authorization, using the built-in features of ASP.NET. In fact, this is one of many ways that you can see how MVC is built on top of ASP.NET. Rather than being an alternative to it, you still have access to many of the built-in services that are part of ASP.NET. This template gives you the option of creating a tests project in addition to the main application project so that you can write unit tests. The Empty Web Application template sets up the project structure, including folders for models, views, and controllers, and sets the references you need to the MVC framework. It provides a really good starting point for a new application that you'll develop from scratch, including building your own CSS styles for views. If you want to create a unit test project with a project created from this template, you'll need to add that manually after you create the Empty Web Application. It really doesn't matter which of these two templates you use. Both provide support for MVC applications, and both are much simpler than starting with a completely blank solution. For the most part, when you're first learning MVC, I really recommend that you generally start with the Web Application template. Even if you have to delete a view or two or remove other elements, you'll get more guidance about how to structure your own applications. You can use the existing views and controllers to experiment with MVC features without taking the time to get an entire application set up. Then, once you know MVC, you can use the Empty Web Application template to start with a clean slate for new applications. What we're going to do now is create a default MVC web application and use it to explore some of its runtime interface features. And then a little later, we'll start looking at the structure of the application and the code that implements it. I have Visual Studio 2010 running, and I'll select File, New Project. And I'll be here within the Web section of the templates. Notice that we have an ASP.NET MVC2 web application and an ASP.NET MVC2 Empty Web Application. So this is the one that you can use to start an application that doesn't have any controllers, views, and so forth already installed as part of it. But in this case, I'm going to create the web application. I'll put it in a convenient location and name it Sample MVC. And click on OK. And that brings up the Create Unit Test Project dialog box. This is the dialog box that I can use in order to create a unit test as part of the solution when Visual Studio is creating all of these project elements. So I can opt yes, and it'll give me a test project name, a default name that I can change. And then I can also select the test framework. In this case, all I have is the Visual Studio Unit Test. This is installed as part of Visual Studio Professional and higher editions. The nice thing here is that if you want to use a third-party or open source unit test framework, you can do that. If it's installed on the machine and it's compatible with Visual Studio, it'll appear within that list. And of course, alternatively, you can opt not to create a unit test project. But for this sample application, I'll go ahead and accept the defaults and create that project. After a couple moments, Visual Studio creates the two projects. The main Sample MVC application, and then the Sample MVC.tests project. I'll go ahead and select the web application and run the application. As you can see, the ASP.NET Development Server started down here. And if I open that back up, you can see that it's on port 49318. And that corresponds to the URL there. Notice that this is a fully functional application. It doesn't do all that much, but it's fully functional. It uses a tabbed interface to go between home and about pages. And it also supports authentication and registration using the ASP.NET membership management features. So I'll go ahead and click there. Now, because this is the first time I'm running this brand new application, there's nothing to log into. There's no existing credentials. So I can go in and register. And I'll create a username of appdev, don@appdev.com, not a real email address. And I'll use a secure appdev password. And click on register. And as you can see, I'm now logged in as appdev. This link is changed to log off. And these are all features that are part of the membership management application within ASP.NET. In fact, this is one demonstration that because MVC is part of ASP.NET, you can hook into many of the same features, the same sets of infrastructure that you can from a web forms application. All right, I'll go ahead and close the browser. So that's great. That's a lot of application for, up to now, very little work. So as you can see, it provides a good chunk of the infrastructure that you need for probably most real-world applications. And you can remove features as you need to, and then build upon the infrastructure in order to create your own applications. Now that we've seen what the application does, let's start exploring the structure of the application. First thing I'll do is clean up the UI a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see, and go back over here to Solution Explorer. Now, as you explore the structure of an MVC application, and if you're coming from an ASP.NET Web Forms application background, it's all going to seem pretty strange at first. But if you generally understand the MVC pattern, you'll soon understand how an MVC application works. It really is a rather elegant architecture. So here in Solution Explorer, you can see the structure of the application. There again are the two projects, Sample MVC and the tests. And I'm just going to close that. We'll talk about tests a little bit later. There are a few standard ASP.NET type directories here, or objects. First is properties, and that's where you can find the assembly info file. There's a list of references. And as you can see, the system.web.mvc and system.web.routing are shown there. And then there's also app data. This is where you'll put any local databases. And in fact, if I select Show All Files here, you can see that we have an ASP.NET-DB.mdf file, which is a SQL Express file that contains all of the membership and registration information to support the application. And just like a regular ASP.NET application, you can remove this file and redirect the application to use maybe a database on a full instance of SQL Server or some other data store in order to save that information. You have all that same kind of flexibility. Or in fact, if you're not going to use authentication and authorization in your application, you can just go ahead and remove that database entirely. And then you can also remove the account controller and some other features. Now, the other standard folders in the project have specific uses within an MVC application. You're going to virtually always want to use those folders, these specific folders, following the conventions of MVC in order to take advantage of the benefits of convention over configuration. By sticking to the conventions, you won't have to do any messy configurations, and you can write much simpler code. So the first folder here is Content. And as you can see, it contains the Cascading Style Sheets file that supports this application. This is where you should place support files for the application, particularly files that either format or create content, including images. This application doesn't have any images, so there's no images subfolder. The next folder is the Controllers folder. As you can probably guess from the name, this is where you should put your controllers. And as you can see, the sample application comes with an account controller, and that handles all of the membership management features, and then the home controller, which is the overall traffic cop for the application. Now there's another important convention here. Besides the fact that you put these files within the controllers folder, the controllers all must have a name that is something controller. And the combination of those is how MVC can identify and use these files in order to implement controllers when you navigate to a particular URL. Again, it's the convention over configuration. If you do these things, put them in the right place, name them the right thing, as well as a couple other things, then they qualify as controllers.